come back, if we came back Saturday morning, it'd be the same deal. We would just go until you all reach a verdict, okay? Okay, very good. Mr. Gonzalez.
May it please the court.
Yep.
Counsel. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'd first like to thank you on behalf of Rashad Murphy and my co-counsel Danny Hernandez for the patience and the attentiveness that you've shown us all over what feels like about 6 months. In all seriousness, because this is a serious matter, sometimes we need just a little bit of levity every once in a blue moon to kind of get both of our feet back on the ground. All of us have our commitments. We have our family. We have, in particular, a special day coming up. We have our personal obligations. But certainly as you sit here listening to the evidence over the past 2 weeks, I'm sure if you didn't initially understand it, you now understand how important this process is. Remember that what Ms. Doherty tells you in her closing statement is not evidence. It is her interpretation of the evidence. What I tell you, what Mr. Petrides tells you, what Mr. Wise tells you, what Mr. Sonardi tells you is not evidence. Evidence comes from the witness stand. Evidence comes from those items of evidence that have been admitted for your review that will go back with you to the jury room for your deliberations, whether it be videos, whether it be photographs, whether it be items of any kind. And you are the triers of fact, not us. We interpret what we believe the evidence has shown you. And therefore, you can presume and expect we would see things in a different light. I represent Rashad Murphy. As you know, Rashad Murphy sits right there in that first seat. And it is the first seat of a very long L-shaped table with a table behind the table. And the reason that that is important is because you know, because we banged in jury selection for day upon day, that Mr. Rashad Murphy, as well as all of the other defendants, have maintained that they are not guilty, and that presumption of innocence follows them until such time as the evidence proves to you each element. You heard Ms. Doherty talk to you a little bit about certain particular crimes, and she said, element number 1, element number 2. You will be instructed by the court on each one of the charges that have been brought against every one of the defendants. For the most part the same, but some a little bit different, and they will all have elements. And you have promised us, me in particular, because I'm the one standing here, that you will hold the state to its burden to prove each and every one of those elements as to each charge that has been presented to you for consideration, beyond and to the exclusion of a reasonable doubt. Rashad Murphy, plain and simple, cannot be placed in Tampa, Florida on 4:40 a.m. on June 23rd of 2024, when Charles Jones, Julio Foolio, was killed. The evidence has shown you that Mr. Murphy's phone, and when we talk about phone, we talk about life. We talk about an extension of our breath, an extension of our arm, an extension of our pocket. We all certainly may have a different perception about our phone, but no one leaves their phone in another city to go away for a couple of days unless it's an accident. Not even the smartest of criminals. Nobody anticipates, hey, I don't want somebody to see my Instagram. I don't want somebody to track my phone and give location data through cell sites. Nobody wants and thinks there's going to be timing advance that is going to ruin or complicate whatever crime I intend to commit. What the evidence shows you, I believe, is that Mr. Murphy's phone is not tracking from Jacksonville to Tampa. It is not in Tampa. It is not moving around Tampa at any relevant time to this murder. And the theory of prosecution as to motive is just misplaced. That is evidence. That's what the evidence tells you. And we're going to talk a little bit later about how you categorize that and what I believe the law and what you will be instructed tells you what to do with it. In addition to the absence of Rashad Murphy's phone in Tampa, which is very significant considering everything you know about phones and everything you learned that you probably didn't know about phones before you sat in those seats. The state would suggest to you that evidence of Mr. Murphy's presence in Walmart on June 21st at about 10:20 a.m. at night provides strong evidence that he participated in the murder of Charles Jones, and it is in fact shooter number one. And why do they do that? Solely and simply because the clothing that he was wearing during the course of the video captured at Walmart as compared to shooter number one in the Home 2 Suites and Tesla videos is similar. I know the state suggested to you, well, who wears a beanie in June? Well, a lot of people do. A beanie is a standard piece of clothing that I would suggest to you is yearly. No matter that it's hot, no matter what the temperature might be, it's an article of clothing. It is an article of clothing like a black hoodie is, like black jeans are, like black military boots are, and my suggestion would be in your everyday life, think to yourself how often or how little you see that manner of dress. Black hoodie, what Detective Ramos opines is a black leather belt, black jeans, and black military boot. I would ask that you pay close attention to State's Exhibit 100 and State's Exhibit 59, which will be with you in the course of your deliberations, but they have provided to you, and I will provide to you, this composite that would show Rashad Murphy at Walmart buying items, and then to your right, shooter number one. Detective Ramos made a comparison of those clothings, and a significant point in his testimony would be what he sees in the form of a unique tear in both sets of jeans at the left knee. Recall that he described it when asked as a perfect match. As we look at Exhibit 59 and 100, a composite that is here for you to view at this particular time, you're going to have to draw your own conclusions when you look at this, and you watch it on your screen, or you collaborate with each other and decide, does anything in those two sets of clothing, other than their style and their color, cause you to believe that it is evidence sufficient to convict Rashad Murphy of premeditated first-degree murder, 3 counts of attempted premeditated first-degree murder, and conspiracy to commit first-degree murder? is equally important is the testimony of Detective Christopher Drabeck. You remember Detective Drabeck is a Jacksonville gang investigator. Didn't really talk to you about a specific gang, but gave you an overview. But his main purpose in his sworn testimony at trial was really his interrelationship with this particular investigation, a little bit different than some of the other Jacksonville detectives who played more of a part in talking to you about gangs. Remember that Detective Drabeck had several roles. That relates to Rashad Murphy and the evidence, or what I would suggest is the lack of evidence in this case. Detective Drabeck located the Walmart video. He was the one that provided to the Tampa Police Department. Additionally, recall that he took the post-Miranda statement of Rashad Murphy after his arrest in Jacksonville. Recalling Detective Drabeck's testimony, Rashad Murphy began that interview being less than candid, and that's polite. He lied about being in Tampa the weekend of June 21st through June 23rd. He would not, on several occasions, admit going to Tampa or involving himself in any knowledge in anything that he did before or after the murder of Charles Jones. I would submit to you that you use your life experiences. When someone is scared, ladies and gentlemen, when someone is fearful for a wrongful implication, they sometimes make poor judgments, and that's exactly what Rashad Murphy did. It's common to attempt to remove yourself from the closeness of a bad situation, but don't automatically presume that that means and equates one-to-one that he's lying about having committed a murder, because those are two different things. That's for you to decide when you look at the totality of this statement. But that's exactly what Rashad Murphy told Detective Drabeck. Recall that Detective Drabeck said that Mr. Murphy said that he knew, he actually tells him, he knew if he put himself near Tampa, it would implicate him in something he didn't do. So he rationalizes, or he tells him at a certain point of time, probably way too late, why he did this. And it is there for your consideration. And Detective Drabeck told you that. Only after he was confronted with evidence that he got into the Uber and drove back to Jacksonville from the Airbnb parking lot with Alicia Andrews and Isaiah Chance did he make admissions about what he knew. Because Rashad Murphy was not completely truthful, again, does not make him guilty of first-degree murder. It is for your consideration to determine why. It may not make him the person that you are. It may not make him the person that you would want to be like, but it doesn't, again, make him guilty of first-degree premeditated murder. He actually told Detective Drabeck, as you recall Detective Drabeck's testimony, that he knew at one point in time it made him look like a liar. But what he did tell Detective Drabeck turns out to be very, very important evidence for your consideration. He tells him that he ended up here because he put stuff in his name. Detective Drabeck told you that. He also said that his Airbnb account was used and that he would never book an Airbnb in Tampa and didn't know it was in Tampa. He told Detective Drabeck that. That is an explanation. That is him attempting to explain to Detective Dravick what occurred. What he said was that his account was used. He also said he thought his vehicle was going to Orlando to take things to his brother. Well, when he's saying that, you don't really put two and two together until you look at the entirety of the evidence. And he said thought he was going to be helped out by having those items taken. You consider the testimony that comes through Detective Dravick and look at your notes if you took them to determine whether Rashad Murphy even owns a car when the state suggests to you a theory of prosecution that Rashad Murphy drove that silver Chevy Cruze down to Tampa. And why do I say that? Because Rashad Murphy told Detective Dravick that he borrowed the car for purposes of being used to go to Martin Correctional Institute, which is where his brother is incarcerated. Rashad Murphy then tells Detective Dravick that he went to go check on the Airbnb. Recall Detective Ramos's testimony that there was phone communication between Davion Murphy's phone, his cousin, and his phone at 5:03 and 5:07 in the morning of June 23rd, the early morning hours of June 23rd. And that's when he went to Tampa, pursuant to those phone calls. He also tells Detective Dravick that he gets a ride from Darius Beals to Tampa, and that when he gets to the parking lot, he goes to the back door and knocks. No one answers, and he goes back to the parking lot. They are coming out of the Airbnb, and he gets in the Uber with Isaiah Chance and Alicia Andrews and drives back to Jacksonville. If you'll remember Detective Ramos, he suggested and battled with me a bit on cross-examination, suggesting that Mr. Murphy's interview indicated that he went to the Airbnb and went into it. And that's an important issue. It's something for your consideration when you seek corroboration, when you seek what is the best evidence. And I'll say this now, and I'll probably say it sometime later on. Corroboration is what makes evidence important. Things can't always be corroborated, but when they can, they provide you an important feature for your consideration. And so in State's Exhibit 145, you're going to have that colloquy of that interview for you to listen collectively, individually, one time, 7 times, in order to determine what Rashad Murphy says with regard to entering that Airbnb. Please carefully review 145. So, because Darius Beals had been killed on June 28th, ironically, 5 days after this particular trip, he could not be interviewed with regard to seeking corroboration on this trip with Rashad Murphy. What was done, though, is that his phones were in evidence and collected as part of the investigation of his death, and there was an extraction done. We've learned more than we can ever hope to need for the rest of our lives about extraction. I can only presume, and I certainly don't want to presume wrongly as it relates to each of you individually, but you saw, and the state provided you, cell site location, information, and data that would have you believe shows Darius Beals did not drive Rashad Murphy to Tampa. But the problem crept up that there was more than one phone associated with Darius Beals. And as you will see and we'll talk about with Rashad Murphy's extraction, it was not a full extraction. The phone was operational. Detective Ramos said that they could not get location data from it. Detective Drabick said that as well. And although the iPhone can be accounted for, the Samsung did not result in the type of extraction. We didn't see that one. There was an extraction. It wasn't put into evidence what its results were. We only saw the results of the iPhone. And what is curious about that is that it doesn't tell us whether or not Darius Beals traveled with Rashad Murphy, as he testified to, and was in possession of the other phone. Now, Detective Ramos, without showing us, told us, well, wasn't turned on that day. Well, I would submit to you, when we're talking about somebody's life, and we're talking about reasonable doubt, and we're talking about the state meeting their burden, what we have to talk about is, can we simply just dismiss that phone was not in Darius Beals' possession? Because Detective Drabick didn't dismiss it. And how do we know that? When I questioned him about it, he said, I could not say where that phone was located, and he could not preclude that it did not travel to Tampa. And that was the right answer. It is the true answer. They cannot tell you that. Recall when Detective Ramos wanted to corroborate Mr. Beals' presence in Jacksonville, he did so by providing 2 pages of thumbnails of pictures. There's Darius Beals. The problem with that was, on cross-examination, we went through every one of those pictures. And do you recall what the bottom line was? None of them were relevant to that time frame that we would have been talking about. It's a nothing burger. Unless it was just left to be taken for granted. They talked about facial recognition, but guess what? Facial recognition, more than one profile for facial recognition can be on a phone. It's very common, especially in shared phones, especially in secondary phones where more than one person may use it. When we look for evidence, ladies and gentlemen, in establishing reasonable doubt, cooperation and support would be the primary means for you to be comfortable with that evidence. While we talk about cooperation in the form of evidence, we come to find out the extraction of Rashad Murphy's jointly possessed phone with his girlfriend, Charmaine Steiger, provides additional information. And why is that important? Because we're relating back to trying to corroborate, number one, what Mr. Murphy told us in his interview. So, as we do that, we first look at State's Exhibit 101. 101, I can't read my writing. It's going to be 101L2. 101L2 is the picture of the floorboard in the vehicle that has a Walmart bag with many items in it. Purchased at Walmart while Mr. Murphy was at Walmart. Why that's important is because Mr. Murphy told Detective Drabeck that he bought those items to go to Martin Correctional that weekend. And there's corroboration to that. What we also know And when we talk about the Airbnb, remember the Airbnb and the confirmation email that was sent to Rashad Murphy. Remember what Rashad Murphy's explanation was about that Airbnb. The confirmation, which states 101M, we've looked at it a couple of times and talked about it. That confirmation was sent to Mr. Murphy because Mr. Murphy's account was used to book the Airbnb. But what it doesn't tell you is whether Mr. Murphy himself booked the Airbnb. What we know from that confirmation is that A, it asks for a driver's license to be sent in order to finish the booking, which is, at the end of the day, that's the goal of who was renting this Airbnb, is to get the booking finished, and it is Mr. Murphy's account. But what it doesn't tell you, and what wouldn't comport with Mr. Murphy's story, is that I wouldn't let somebody use my account. I let them use my account, but I wouldn't let them use my account to book an Airbnb in Tampa. That's not what was supposed to happen. And you cannot look at this confirmation and say to yourself, well, that tells Rashad Murphy that the Airbnb in Tampa. It doesn't. It has no address. It has no city. When you look at it, all you see is a confirmation at Lagoon Oasis for a 2-bedroom, 2-bath. That's corroboration to his story, to his statement that he gave. When you look at credibility to that extent. Now, understand, let's relate back to the fact that Rashad Murphy lied. Okay? Let's relate back to the fact that it took him to get to a certain point where he said, regardless of how bad this may look for me, okay, I'm going to explain myself. But the explanation, unless, boy, somebody is really thinking on their feet, and I don't mean putting 1 and 1 together. I'm putting 1 and 1 and 1 and 1 is 5 together in the span of coming out of that apartment with a blanket over your head and figuring out what to say. So you look for this confirmation. And the confirmation doesn't show you that. But what it also shows you, and which is supported by the evidence, is very soon after that, the driver's license is sent, right, to complete the booking. But the records and the data doesn't tell us that that driver's license was sent to Airbnb. It is just as plausible, and I would ask you to consider, based on the evidence, whether it was sent to Isaiah Chance and Alicia Andrews. Why would we think that, other than the story and the explanation that Rashad Murphy is already in the midst of? Because there's evidence that Alicia Andrews and or Isaiah Chance were attempting to rent an Airbnb unsuccessfully, thereby Rashad Murphy's Airbnb account being used. And how do we support that a little bit further? In addition to their attempt to unsuccessfully rent an Airbnb, Isaiah Chance pays for it. He pays for it. And so, to that extent, the corroboration that you should seek becomes much plainer for your consideration. As we continue to use Rashad Murphy's interview as support for the sequence of events, he relates to Detective Drabeck, who testified, and Detective Ramos actually is the one that authenticated the exhibit. I would ask you to look at Defense Exhibit 3. Defense Defense Exhibit 3 is screenshotted in Mr. Murphy's phone. And unless he thought about the bag of the items, and he thought about the Airbnb, and he thought about the text message, and he weaved like a spider a web in a very short period of time, what is being portrayed here, and I'll read it, the first part's cut off, but bathroom inside parking lot, inside the men's bathroom, inside the garbage can, inside the Walmart bag. Okay, them the last instructions, right? Yeah, but remember, before they actually let you in the parking lot, it's going to be a checkpoint. Tell them I'm applying for a job. I called up here yesterday. They told me to come pick up my application today. Then they're going to let you in the parking lot to make sure you park close to the bathroom and have y'all in your pants or something. Once you put it in the garbage can, walk up to the entrance window of the prison and get an application before you leave back up. Later, that becomes important because what happened? Things didn't happen. Chevy Cruise didn't go to Martin Correctional. Items didn't go to Martin Correctional. What's going on, brah? Did you make it? My people say didn't see it. Didn't go. Didn't happen. Plan wasn't fulfilled. Detective Ramos, well, first let me go back to Draven. He indicated that there were going to be items going to his brother at Martin Correctional Institute. Where is that? South of Jacksonville, south of Orlando, south of Tampa, on the East Coast. That's where Detective Ramos told you Martin Correctional was. So what does Ramos do? In further corroboration to what Rashad Murphy is telling you, he does a reverse. He gets that phone number on that text messages, and although he doesn't speak to the subscriber, comes back to a person who's incarcerated where? Martin Correctional with Shaheem Murphy, Mr. Murphy's brother. And I hearken you back to 101L2, which was the item, the bag with the items in it. One thing that he did continue to maintain from beginning to end without any admission or any waiver is that he was not in Tampa at the time of Charles Jones' murder. He did have knowledge of what was going to take place. He didn't conspire and didn't participate in the murder of Charles Jones. I believe that the court will instruct you on conspiracy because Mr. Murphy is charged with conspiracy in count 2 of the indictment. And in order to commit a conspiracy, the state elements again. Element number 1, the intent of the defendant was that the offense of first-degree premeditated murder, not that an offense, not that a crime, that first-degree murder would be committed, and that he agreed, conspired, combined, or confederated with one or more of its co-defendants so that first-degree murder be committed by them, one of them, or some other person. It also goes on to say that the agreement or the conspiracy or the confederation or the combination to commit a first-degree murder has to be expressed in a particular word or a particular words that pass between the conspirators. We also heard from Detective Ramos, who again was the lead detective in this case for a significant amount of time on a couple of different occasions, on a variety of different things over a couple of days. Despite Detective Ramos' wealth of information and evidence uncovered throughout the course of this investigation, he had to indicate to you when asked that there was no evidence to determine the occupants of the black Chevy Impala or the silver Chevy Cruze at any relevant portion of time in Tampa as it relates to Rashad Murphy, because I am here for Rashad Murphy, and Rashad Murphy is one person. He's an individual, and that's what Detective Ramos said. I cannot corroborate and have no evidence that Rashad Murphy was an occupant of either of those vehicles during any relevant times on the way from Jacksonville to Tampa and while in Tampa. Again, no cell phone evidence, no cell site locations, no data that relates to Rashad Murphy, no identification of him as one of the three shooters, except for the similarity of clothing, which you will look at, I'm presuming, very closely as you deliberate. Not one of the victims can identify anyone. And again, the state told you, and I get it, in that type of circumstance, the way they were dressed, nobody's going to make an identification. But you know what? Sometimes things happen. Didn't happen in this case, and there is no identification. That is the evidence. It doesn't get you closer to a determination as to whether or not Rashad Murphy committed this murder, other than create reasonable doubt. Detective Ramos talked to you about several subjects of evidentiary interest, including firearms, ammunition, located in search warrants, whether it be cars, whether it be houses. Some of that evidence tied to the shooting of Charles Jones in October of 2023, as well as Charles Jones' murder in June 23rd of 2024. What is missing in the entirety of the forensic evidence in this case, as it relates to ballistics, as it relates to firearms, which have become an important part of this case, did you hear that any of it had any relationship to Rashad Murphy? Not a single stitch of it. There is no video in this case at any juncture that would identify Rashad Murphy, short of a guy wearing all black. This becomes critically relevant because you promised me again in jury selection that you understood that each of these defendants needs to be treated separately. You have to compartmentalize the evidence that exists as to one or more, if that be the case, of these defendants and not others, specifically as it relates to Rashad Murphy. You should give consideration to the evidence that you heard from the witness stand, and obviously with those pieces and items that have come into evidence through the court, and to what extent it implicates a person or persons and not other person or persons. It's a tough task. Over 2 weeks, you heard a lot. And it will take, I predict, a significant amount of deep diving into how all of this interrelates. And it won't be simple. It won't be simply just so-and-so talked to so-and-so. We're going to talk about why. It won't be because so-and-so sent a picture to so-and-so. It won't be so-and-so got a picture from somebody who's unknown on a certain day, 4 days before the murder, or a day after the murder. It's going to be more complicated than that if you're going to give each and every one of these defendants the type of review that's necessary in a premeditated first-degree murder with the most significant stakes that anyone could ever face in any crime.
Objection.
All right. Come up here real quick. Just a reminder, we discussed this during jury selection. At this phase, you're only making a determination as to guilt or not, okay? Nothing else at this juncture. All right, you may continue, Mr. Gonzalez.
Thank you, Your Honor. So I expect that the court's going to instruct you that a separate crime is charged against each defendant in each count of the indictment that you will have back there with you. The defendants have been tried together. However, the charges against each defendant and the evidence applicable to him must be considered separately. A finding of guilt or not guilty as to one or some of the defendants must not affect your verdict as to any other defendant or other crimes charged. This is the law, and you must apply that law to the facts. Ladies and gentlemen, this case has been overrun and dominated by a significant amount of gang evidence. The gang evidence I would submit to you is to get you to the point and down a path that because Rashad Murphy has been documented by a statute, 874, as a member of 1200, that paves the way for his motivation to participate in the murder of Charles Jones in furtherance of and on behalf of the gang. I believe the court's going to instruct you on the definition of a criminal gang member, and although you've already been exposed to the criteria, you will see them all. And I'm not going to talk about that now. I might talk about it a little bit later. But essentially, you're going to use that as it relates to this documentation. As it relates to Rashad Murphy, in particular, you heard from Detective Griffin from the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, who indicated to you that he was the gang investigator for 1200. Detective Griffin became the 1200 gang investigator in January of 2024, which is just some five and a half months or so prior to Charles Jones' murder. Detective Griffin indicated to you that he associated the Instagram account Ghost187 to Rashad Murphy for two reasons. Because his field interrogation reports with people on the street said so, and because other detectives with the Jacksonville Sheriff's Department told him that account belonged to Rashad Murphy. When I asked Detective Griffin if he had ever seen a profile picture or a post that referred to Rashad Murphy personally, or profiled to him, or family, or one or more of his 4 kids, or anything directly related to him that he could associate with him through the actual account, he indicated that he could not. He had not memorialized any screenshots memorialize any review of that account? When I asked him, he said no. When I asked him if he recalled the names of those that had associated the account to Rashad Murphy in those field reports, because remember, they're not always written down. They don't take names, they don't take numbers, they don't take pictures. They just get the information. And of course, what he said was no. And while we're talking about that issue, in asking all of the Jacksonville detectives the same questions, they all had the same answers, except for one exception. The exception would have been when I posed that same type of question to Detective Nieder. You will remember that he said, I saw a live screen of Rashad Murphy on that account. When I asked him the date, he said, I don't know. When I asked him what the subject was of the screen recording, he said, I don't know. When I asked him whether or not he documented it, saved it, screenshotted it, put it in a file, in gathering gang intelligence, which is what they do on a day-to-day basis, he said he did not. And this is the mantra of gang investigation. The lack of memorialization, the lack of detail as it creates over and over again a void in time, date, names, or persons is routine and taken for granted simply because of what detectives tell you. I would submit to you that that in and of itself is not reliable evidence for you to consider when determining Rashad Murphy's guilt in a first-degree murder premeditation case. Whether it be Detective Nieder, Detective Griffin, Detective McCullough, this plethora of gang-related information always comes with the same proviso. A majority of that day-to-day investigation is like we talked about, gathering intelligence, monitoring social media, Instagram, Clubhouse, Spaces, YouTube, Twitter, X. They uniformly indicated that much of the time these sources are people's opinion to begin with. They stated that then when they review these sources, the content or the comments can come from Jacksonville residents, they can come from people from other locations that you wouldn't know because you wouldn't know their usernames, and that thousands upon thousands of people flood social media platforms with commentary ranging from celebrations of people's death, disrespect to people's death, you got what you deserved type of commentary, when it comes to the reporting of murders and shootings. These detectives also uniformly highlighted that these groups originate in neighborhoods, and we've heard multiple times during the course of the testimony, hybrid gangs. Hybrid gangs, they have no initiations, they have no hierarchy, they have no bosses, they have no rules. They essentially work in a loose format. They don't have consequences. They can go from one to another. Very often the individuals that are associated act on their own. They said that. They testified they don't need to be instructed to commit a crime. They don't need to be told to go do a crime. They don't say, okay, you, and you go do this crime. It doesn't work that way in a hybrid gang. They admitted that individuals associated with these types of respective gangs can commit a crime, commit a shooting, commit a murder against someone from another group or someone that's outside of that group, just a regular person they may not like, a person they might have a beef with, a person that stole their girlfriend, whatever the circumstances may be. And that could happen even without the rest of the group even knowing that it was committed until after it was done. So what I'm trying to get at is that you shouldn't just poof assume that every time something happens, it's in relationship directly to the gang, especially this kind of gang, as testified to over and over and over again. With respect to Rashad Murphy, I would suggest that there's a lack of evidence that would corroborate this participation at all. And don't just buttress it with this belief that he's a gang member. He's documented as one. Can't lie about that. That's what 874 says. 874 says that when you are in a drill rap video and you do it on 4 occasions, because remember there's a BOGO there when you get to these criteria. There's one that says that if you associate with a gang member, boom, you get a check. Or if you're in the company of a gang member 4 or more times, boom, you get a check. But those are both the same things. Listen to them, read them to yourself, put them next to you, and what ends up happening is your criteria has been met in a blink of an eye. And it's certainly the law. I'm not asking you to disregard the law. I'm just asking you to look at how the law is written and what it does to people. So, Rashad Murphy's in videos, drill rap videos. I'm going to ask you to look at those individual stills and determine whether or not he is utilizing a gang sign. Look at the stills, look at the video, because as we talked about, and you can think it makes common sense. When you look at something like this, it may not be what it is when you do this. And therefore, that was kind of crazy what I just did. I apologize now looking back on it. But nonetheless, you understand where I'm going with this. You can't just take things in a vacuum. So follow that up and finish it up with, in 2021 and 2022, Rashad Murphy, based on a field interrogation report, was stopped as a passenger in a car with Noah Williams, Spinabenz, who is at that time, 2021, a documented gang member of ATK, and therefore you're a passenger in his car, you've known him all your life, you grew up together, and you have now checked off that criteria. I'd like you to consider those things. Criminal gang member definitions. I'm not going to go through them. The criteria is there. You heard it multiple times during testimony. You will have it as a definition when you deliberate. And I would ask you to consider it. Going back to Detective Nieder for just a moment, and then I'm going to move on. When we talked about general information based on his history, his opinion on alleged Jacksonville gangs, his opinion and interpretation on lyrics of drill rap videos, and finally his opinion on the gang he is currently assigned, which is ATK. He honestly tells you again that he relies very heavily on social media platforms, and in many cases, he doesn't even know where those posts are coming from. In his day-to-day intelligence gathering, he speaks to people on the street, again, without writing a report or even memorializing these names. He agreed with me that drill rap video is the highest level of disrespect, posting, rapping about people who died, putting it out there for everyone to see in order to get clicks, in order to get views, notoriety, get the community talking about you, celebrating a murder. The more angry, the more violent, the more pointed with disrespect, the more money. He also told you that with respect to many of these incidents that would form the basis of this war, that although not all of them, many of them are unsolved. He told you about the murder of Jaquan Pickens, Jake Jitt, unsolved. He told you about the murder of Antonio Tilley, who was in fact killed by Jaquan Mills. This was testified to. And Jaquan Mills is not a gang member. He talked to you about Charles Jones being shot, you remember, in the foot in October of 2023. That case is unsolved. The truth of the matter is that most of these murders are not as simple as you would have them be when you just listen to them, because many have equally plausible explanations and alternative factual basis that would indicate that they're not all gang-related activity. Certainly not leading to enough evidence that would result in an arrest. When asked, none of them connected to Rashad Murphy except for 1200. That's the only thing that would potentially connect Rashad Murphy to any of those things that would be the impetus, if you will, for him committing a murder in furtherance of the gang. What the state has intimated to you, though, in very clear terms, is that their theory is that Rashad Murphy's motive for killing Charles Jones, Julio Foolio, centered around the murder of Joe Rod Adams, Spaz, who died at 17 while at Raines High School at a football game. You heard testimony about that. A murder that took place 6 years prior to Mr. Jones's death. 6 years prior to Mr. Jones's death. This was not an open wound, as been suggested, based on a motive, ladies and gentlemen. There's no evidence that Rashad Murphy ever attempted to kill Mr. Jones during that 6-year time period. No evidence he participated in Mr. Jones' prior shootings. It's made up vengeance you were asked to attribute to Rashad Murphy and some desire to kill Julio Foolio. And this dovetails into Kenny Capps. And I'm going to try my best not to talk for a very long time about Robert Howard, Kenny Capps. Remember, he was charged in the Joe Rod Adams murder, but in addition to telling you that there are no gangs, they're just neighborhoods, Mr. Howard ended up being charged with first-degree murder in that particular case with Joe Rod Adams. And he ended up pleading to manslaughter and doing 5 years. He got out in May of 2023. I'll try to spend as little breath as I possibly can on Mr. Howard, because I believe the evidence indicates to you that when he talked, lies fell out. Remember that he identifies Mr. Murphy from a photo pack, and in the same respect goes on to tell you that he had seen Mr. Murphy multiple times while he was in jail during the course of his arrest, during the course of the case. So I would ask you to look at Mr. Murphy's booking photo when you deliberate, which is 98C. And 98C shows Mr. Murphy. Also, at the same time, and while you're doing that, look at States 107, because States 107 is going to give you the photo pack that Mr. Howard picked Mr. Murphy out of. And it is, in fact, the same picture that was plastered on the news at the time of his arrest, and that should surprise no one and would lend Mr. Howard no additional credibility as to his being able to pick Mr. Murphy out of the photo pack. If you recall, Mr. Murphy, Mr. Howard told you he didn't kill Joe Wright Adams. Adrian Gaynor did. And he said, everybody knew. Said the street knew. Everybody knew. In fact, he considers it some kind of badge of honor. Okay? And it's because he tells you, I don't know, you don't know, they don't know, the state doesn't know, nobody knows. But he says to this day, he said when he sat up there under oath, I didn't do it. So why that is important is because why would Rashad Murphy have a beef with Robert Howard? He knew, everybody knew, he didn't kill Joe Wright Adams. Okay? He's certainly not charged with the murder of Adrian Gaynor, who was supposed to have pulled the trigger. He died later, but somebody was arrested and somebody was convicted of that murder. So I ask you to consider when you think about this motive situation and Joe Wright Adams and why the evidence suggests to you that it shouldn't be the reason why you think Mr. Murphy would have any reason to kill Charles Jones is because, number one, it was 6 years later, nothing happened. And secondly, Charles Jones was a friend of Robert Howard's. Charles Jones was a friend of Adrian Gaynor. But there's never been any suggestion, to my knowledge, in the testimony you heard, that Charles Jones was suspected or was the killer of Joe Wright Adams. So where's the connection? Why all of a sudden is this Joe Wright Adams thing the reason why Rashad Murphy wants to kill Charles Jones? Talk about that and look at how that circle presents itself in your determination as to whether you think there's sufficient evidence. Not that you have to have a motive, and the state will tell you you don't have to have a motive, but they've already told you that that was the motive. Rashad Murphy has no reason to care about Robert Howard, ladies and gentlemen. None whatsoever. And so here comes Robert Howard. He's going to roll in 14 months after Charles Jones' murder, and he's going to say, hi, I would like to talk to the prosecutors and the state attorney and law enforcement. I have information that I spoke to Rashad Murphy before and after on FaceTime, and we had conversations, and he told me things. Then they give him a subpoena. Well, of course, there's a vehicle for him to come subpoena, but now he's testifying under a subpoena. Okay? But at the end of the day, he called them. They didn't call him. And so 14 months later, not on the 23rd of June when he was arrested, not after he got arrested the next day for distribution of methamphetamine, and he's been in jail for those months, did he contact law enforcement? Did he say, hey, look, I got some information for you. Hey, there's something you ought to know. Hey, I want to be a good citizen. Whatever it may be. When did it happen? 14 months later. 14 months later, after he pled guilty to distribution of methamphetamine in federal court, punishable by life, subject to enhanced sentencing because of his prior serious felony, minimum mandatory 15 years in the federal penitentiary, in addition to, we haven't even got to, his violation of probation on the manslaughter, aggravated battery, and battery on a law enforcement officer, okay, that he's still facing as well. So he trots himself down, and look, I don't believe the state attorney's office promised him anything. I don't believe the federal government promised him anything. And why would they? He needs to testify. He needs to show us what worth he has. And the worth is in the story. And the story is in a story that can't be corroborated. So to that extent, it remains to be seen how Mr. Howard will ultimately benefit from his testimony. But what he will say, without equivocation, is, hey, of course I want help. Told you that. Hey, I'd like to get some benefit from this. So it's the type of story it is that can't be corroborated. It's the timing of the story that should cause you pause to realize that this is a lie, and the benefit that he is expecting to receive. It's not what somebody will give him, it's what he is expecting to get. That's the key word for your consideration. So, at the end of the day, the court's going to instruct you that you can weigh the evidence, and you decide what evidence is reliable. You'll be instructed that you use your common sense in deciding which is the best evidence and which evidence should not be relied upon in considering your verdict. And I would suggest to you that the evidence would suggest he is not to be believed. He is not to be trusted, and there's too many reasons to count. One of the criteria you should consider how witnesses acted as well as what they said. And one of those particular things is, number 4, did the witness have some interest in how the case should be decided? Well, there should be a picture of Robert Howard right next to that. That's how close this fits as it relates to your consideration of his testimony. And finally, as a part, and I'm just paraphrasing, as a part of this instruction, you may rely on your own conclusion about the credibility of any witness. You may believe or disbelieve all or any part of the evidence or the testimony of any witness. Any witness. But in particular, Robert Howard, I would suggest to you that the evidence suggests it is a straight up, in capital letters, disbelief. I want to talk a little bit. Well, no. I want to finish up with Robert Howard real quick. There was another thing that bothered me in the testimony that I think is relevant for your consideration. So, remember that Robert Howard went in August, 14 months later, and he gave a sworn statement. During the course of that sworn statement, Detective Ramos had the wherewithal to say, hey, listen, did you have a phone? You know, we'd like to look at your phone, corroboration. We're attempting to corroborate to determine whether or not there's evidence somewhere that you should believe or give credence to. And Robert Howard signed a consent form. Federal government, law enforcement had his phone. He used that phone in doing the deals that he was in trouble for and he got arrested for, which means that they got his phone number. They got his phone number. So what happens then? Very curious. Recall Detective Ramos. I asked him, what about the phone? You know, you started off getting the iCloud address for Kenny Capps. He remembered that. He told you that they had his phone. You acted like you were going to follow up with regard to getting the consent form signed to look through that phone. But then a couple of emails to the feds, and it kind of just disappeared. The one means of corroborating Mr. Howard was never followed up upon. Never followed up upon. In addition to the fact that we talked about, and there was testimony elicited from one of the detectives, even if you didn't know the phone number, which I would submit to you is going to be the evidence in his criminal case, all you have to do is call 911 from that number once it's powered up, and you'll be able to get to the number. What do you do with that number? You get call record details. You do data checks on it. You determine whether it can be extracted. Any number of ways that you could go down that road to do what? Corroborate that Mr. Howard had a conversation or dose or trace, whatever it may be, with Rashad Murphy, because that's important. And Law Enforcement 101, why just stop? The only reason you stop is if you're satisfied with the answer. You're satisfied with the answer. So, moving on to go back to the Airbnb. What you recall from the Airbnb at Laguna Oasis in Tampa, the evidence showed you that there was no attempt to hide their identity, the individuals who were at the Airbnb. Isaiah Chance, Davion Murphy, Alicia Andrews, Sean Gathright. The state would like to tell you that they got sloppy when they started going in and out and when the Vivint Ring camera captured them. But in the same breath that they want to call them sloppy, they characterize this plan, if you will, smooth, precise, intimately coordinated, thought through and through, expert marksman. Those are phrases that connotate detail. And so I don't believe they can have their cake and eat it too. But at the end of the day, what the evidence shows you is that those individuals freely came and went from that Airbnb, which would indicate their stay there. What it also indicates to you is that Rashad Murphy is not at that Airbnb at times relevant to this murder. Not 1 ounce of evidence, not one, to support that notion. You heard testimony that Alicia Andrews admitted that the other stayed with her at the Airbnb. You saw Davion Murphy activate the camera by crossing the parking lot. And there's a picture of that. It's part of the composite of the Vivint camera. You didn't see Rashad Murphy going across that parking lot. You didn't see Rashad Murphy getting into that Uber. Well, we know he did. The point is, he's not on that video. He's not on that Airbnb. The Airbnb driver, the Uber driver told you he was the front seat passenger. He was the one that slept the whole way. I didn't see where he came from, okay, because I was putting bags in the back of the car. Again, I would point you to the one smidgen of evidence that the state would have you rely on, and that is that if Mr. Murphy went into the Airbnb, it would have been for a fleeting moment based on their or their presentation to you of the evidence, and also you can reconcile that when you listen to that portion of his interview. Corroboration of that, as you hearken back in order to get support, would be going back to how the Airbnb was rented, what account, by whom, who paid for it. Go back and tie these strings together for your deliberations. Consciousness of guilt. The state has introduced evidence on 2 fronts with regard to Rashad Murphy, and what they are going to argue and have already argued to you is consciousness of guilt. Number 1 is Mr. Murphy's Jacksonville arrest, where he did not come out for several hours, despite many attempts by law enforcement to get him out. I guess if you want to call that consciousness of guilt, you can. The question is, where was he going? He didn't try to get in a car and speed out of town. He was there. He didn't want to come out, evidently afraid. He was not armed. He was not threatening. Finally, when he either felt it safe to come out or felt that it was time to come out, he came out with his dog, came out with his Bible. He gave himself up. He did not, in any respect, resist law enforcement. But let's consider, when you talk about another reason why that could be the case, You have to go back 3 or 4 weeks ago. Because remember, in Gwinnett County, he was stopped in the Chevy Cruze. He was rolled up on and blocked in that Baymont Hotel. As he was getting out of the car, he had a gun drawn to him, and his instinct was that he ran. Would you have run? Would I have run?
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
He ran. When he ran, he got tased. When he went to the ground and he was immobilized during that portion of time, for whatever reason, he was tased again, and he was tased in his privates. There was a struggle. He separated his shoulder. You could see in the video, there's a gun touching his temple. He went to the hospital. He got treated for a separated shoulder. So when you decide whether what happened in Jacksonville is consciousness of guilt, certainly consider what happened 4 weeks prior to that and decide whether or not there is any other plausible reason for his concern. And while you're at it and you're considering whether or not there's consciousness of guilt as it relates to the incident at Gwinnett, consider those circumstances as well and look at that video. And you can decide whether simply him running upon seeing that gun in a strange community, in a place that he doesn't live, someone might have done the same. There's also evidence that has been testified to with regard to the flock videos in Gwinnett County. Remember, the insinuation, if that is the case, would be that Mr. Murphy's vehicle was traveling in tandem with a black Chrysler 300, which comes back to Noah Williams. Again, Noah Williams is a childhood friend. Noah Williams and that Chevy Cruze are close to each other on 2 separate occasions within an hour of each other. But recall and understand and take into consideration that you should lend 0 credence to this camera video, because what you also know is that Mr. Murphy was incarcerated at that time. Mr. Murphy's not in that car. Rashad Murphy, look at the times. I won't take it time to do it now. Look at the incarceration certified information. He was in jail in Gwinnett County when those flock cameras were taken. So choose to give whatever weight you choose to give for that, for whatever reason. A lot's been said about Mr. Murphy's jointly possessed telephone, the extraction, things on the extraction. Consider all pieces of evidence or lack of evidence when it comes to extractions and context and what you have and what you don't. Why that is particularly important in this case is that if you remember the testimony from Sergeant Carter from Gwinnett County indicated to you that there became a big problem with that phone. I would suggest to you the evidence would be because it was mismanaged. It was mismanaged because the cover was never taken off. It was put on the Cellbrite charger overnight without looking at it close enough to know that the wireless charger was not charging. And therefore what happens in that circumstance is that the phone goes dead. That's the one thing you can't have when you're doing an extraction, is the phone to go dead while it's in your care. Instead of waiting and starting the extraction again, it was left on overnight, it wasn't charging, and when the analyst came back the next morning, it was dead. What does that do? That changes the ability to get a full and entire extraction. It limits what you can get in terms of data, in terms of text messaging, in terms of location. And so, therefore, you consider what, if anything, that would ultimately have to do after the mismanagement of the Gwinnett County Sheriff's Department in handling that phone and getting from that phone anything that would be contextually important, before, after, during. Ladies and gentlemen, you also heard briefly about the Spaces conversation between Isaiah Chance and Julio Foolio, and subsequent messaging between Rashad Murphy and Sean Gathright. Recall that there was some banter back and forth between the two amongst 16 other people. This is not a private conversation. It's on an open Spaces conversation line. I'm not very familiar with it, but that's what's happening because you're listening to it. And they're getting after each other a little bit, and Foolio was telling Isaiah Chance, hey, look, you're a fraud. You know, you heard testimony that, you know, he had made mention that he was gay. Remember that Isaiah Chance was an aspiring rapper as well. Okay? Remember that he wants to be, if he isn't already at that particular time, a rapper, certainly not with the notoriety and the monetization that Julio Foolio has. And essentially, afterwards, consider that exchange being, look, go do what you do. Don't let that guy bother you. You stay doing what you're doing. It doesn't have to be, hey, look, leave him alone because we're going to go kill him. You decide when you consider the evidence and what you hear and how it relates to the context of the messaging and whether or not there are plausible explanations for it. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to talk real briefly about direct and circumstantial evidence, okay? Direct evidence is evidence that tends to prove a fact directly that is in question in a case without the necessity on reliance of inferences or proof from other facts, right? Direct evidence versus circumstantial evidence. Circumstantial evidence, on the other hand, and follow me on this, is evidence that first has to be relevant. Once it's relevant, it is of a quality that leads to an inference that an event did or not occur. Circumstantial evidence is legal evidence. It is allowing you, and you can utilize it, but you have to be careful with it. You can't take an inference, and you shouldn't take an inference, that doesn't go from here to here to here, but yet goes from here to here, and then you rely on it in an effort to come to a conclusion. Circumstantial evidence needs to be proved beyond and to the exclusion of a reasonable doubt in and of itself. Things that lead you to other things are very dangerous. And I want you to keep that in mind when you deliberate. I strongly believe, ladies and gentlemen, the evidence in this case and what it's shown you is that Rashad Murphy is not guilty of premeditated first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit the same, and 3 counts of attempted first-degree murder based on the totality of the evidence. But you need to know that even if the evidence does not convince you that Mr. Murphy committed the crimes for which he is accused, and I just named them to you, there may be evidence that you may find that he committed other acts that would constitute lesser crimes. And so in that regard, the law dictates that if it hasn't been proved beyond and to the exclusion of a reasonable doubt, you would look at lesser crimes. And I want to just go through them with you very quickly. Not gonna post them. We're not going to go into them in depth. But the lesser crimes of first-degree murder are second-degree murder and manslaughter. The lesser crimes to attempted first-degree murder are attempted second-degree murder, attempted manslaughter, and aggravated battery. And you should know those, and there will be an instruction that the court gives you that will set them out. So, as I conclude my argument, and thank you for your attention while I've done so, remember, it's not if you believe Rashad Murphy is guilty of one or any of these charges. If you believe that he might have done it, that's not enough. If you believe he possibly did it, that's not enough either. If you're pretty sure, maybe even almost certain, that he's guilty, if you can't exclude a reasonable doubt, then the state hasn't met its burden. It's not about odds. We're here in Tampa, Florida, not Las Vegas. Reasonable doubt can come in the form of a lack of evidence. It can come in the form of the quality of the evidence, which we've talked about that a lot in this closing argument, the quality of the evidence and the lack of being able to prove something. And it also can come in a conflict in the evidence. And I believe the evidence is lacking in all three of those phases as you sit down and you categorize what you've heard. Remember that you are 12 individual people when this is all said and done. You're 15 right now, so I don't want to slight anybody, but you will be 12 individual people. And not merely just a group of 12. And the reason I say that is you're going to go back there and you're going to deliberate as those 12 individuals. And you've promised me you're going to do that. But you're going to do it together. Maybe it's compounding. Maybe it's not a great way to explain it. But what I can tell you is this has been going on 30 days or so, even back through jury selection. And you've gotten to talk to each other every day throughout the course of the day, talked about each other's lives, probably each other's families, probably each other's work. And you might have formed friendships with people. You might have determined you don't like somebody so much. You certainly might have built a rapport and respect for your fellow jurors. And to that extent, you might think of yourself as a group. That would be natural. That would be human nature. But at the end of the day, this is an individual decision for each of you. And you told me in jury selection that you would remain true to those beliefs and those convictions based on your oath and your view of the evidence, despite the fact that you may be in a majority or you may be one. You may be that one that is so firm in your convictions that despite having spoken with everyone else and listened, you have a particular place that you are in this case, and you should not give that up unless you are convinced otherwise. Thank you again. You'll be told this again, but when I sit down, and you don't have to all start clapping at one time, you won't hear from me again, but you will hear from Ms. Doherty again. It's called rebuttal based on the law. I'd love to get up after her, and then she could get up after me, and then I could get after her, and we could go all night and figure out who was left standing and conscious at the end of the day. But having said that, the last word is not always the most credible word. And I would leave you with Rashad Murphy should not be penalized for what he did not do and what the evidence does not prove he did, and what I believe the state is incapable of meeting their burden beyond and to the exclusion of a reasonable doubt. So I hope that after you deliberate thoughtfully, you will come back with a verdict of not guilty as to premeditated first-degree murder, not guilty as conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, and not guilty on 3 counts of attempted first-degree murder. Thank you very much.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. Gonzalez. Let's just take a quick 10-minute stretch comfort break, all right? We will come back and continue with closing arguments.
All rise.